Yep.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, and welcome to the NYSAIS webinar. We have about 25 people so far on this webinar with us today. I'm Mark Laurie. I'm the Executive Director for NYSAIS, and we're very happy to have all of you with us. The webinar, this is the first of 3 webinars that we are doing. This webinar will be on net tuition revenue. You will be able to find a copy of the PDF on the website, the NYSAIS website, and in our community space. We have 2 more webinars scheduled. One is on Monday, January 13th in 2014, and it will also be at 4:30 p.m. And we have a second webinar after this scheduled for Monday, April 7th. If you look on your screen, you see 4 of us. Sarah Daignault, who is our speaker today, Andrew Cook, and Andrew Cook is the NYSAIS Technology Coordinator. And in just a moment, I'm going to turn this over to Andrew so he can walk you through some of the features of the webinar that will help you participate. Barbara Swanson is also with us today, and Barbara will be monitoring. Barbara's our Associate Director for Professional Development, and she will be monitoring our chat room where you'll be able to put in questions. So I'm going to turn this over to Andrew Cook, who will explain to you in just a few minutes some of the features of GoToWebinar, so you know how to talk to us, and there'll be a couple of polls going on. So Andrew, do you want to go ahead and take it over and explain what's going on with the what the audience can do with this?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. And to echo what Mark said, welcome everyone. We're really excited to do the first of the 3 webinars here. On your control panel, which should be on the right-hand side, you can expand that out. There should be an orange and white arrow. If you only see 5 buttons or 6 buttons, just click that arrow so it expands to the entire thing. In there, you have the ability to chat with us, ask questions, as well as raise your hand, which should also be on the toolbar. If you raise your hand when we get to the question portion of this webinar, we'll turn on your microphone and we'll give you the opportunity to ask your question to Sarah. If you have any questions, technical problems, just submit them into the questions section. And if you want to chat with us, Barbara and Mark will be monitoring the chat. Thanks.
So I want to turn it over now to our speaker, which is Sarah Daignault. And I think most of you know Sarah. She's presented with NYSAIS many times. She's an expert in this area of finance for independent schools. You may not know that Sarah was the former executive director of the National Business Officers Association, also known as NBOA. She also spent 5 years as the business officer at Friends School in Baltimore and was the business manager at Bryn Mawr School for girls. She also herself has been a trustee at an independent school. She was on the board of directors at the Madeira School in Virginia. She's chaired the board, she's chaired capital campaigns, and also chaired head searches. She currently serves on the board for the National Coalition of Girls Schools. She served on the board of NAIS, and she currently is a faculty member at Columbia University Teachers College. We are thrilled to have Sarah Daignault with us, and we can't really give a big round of applause because we're virtual, but if you could give a virtual round of applause, maybe through the chat room, we would like to welcome Sarah Daignault to NYSAIS. Sarah, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. I love the webinar format because we're all in different places, but at this moment we are here together, whatever that means technologically. What I plan to do today is talk about net tuition revenue. For any of you who had the opportunity to be at the presentation in September, I talked a lot about a variety of different things, and these 3 webinars that Mark referred to, we're going to drill down into some specific things with an opportunity for you to ask questions and sort of get some deeper understanding. You can see on the slide that where the subtitle is focusing on the amount of financial aid old-fashioned. I want to get sort of a new concept for all of us to think differently about how we do discounting. So Hold on a second. Having a technological problem. Hang on. There we go. Okay. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk a little bit about terminology so we're all on the same page. And then I want to explore two different ways of viewing tuition and discounts. And then I want to talk a little bit about emerging trends in discounts. And finally, if we still have time, I have a list of complicated questions about pricing of your school. And so we can sort of delve into all of those. But now what we're going to do is we're going to have a polling question. This is a place where you get to do something. So Andrew's going to put up a question, and on your control panel, you'll be able to answer this question, because what I want to do is find out is who's on the call today. So if you see on your screen the polling question, if you go in and answer it, then we'll get to see the results of who's on the call.
And remember, if you want to speak with us, go to the chat room. There's a place where you can type your messages in the chat room.
Okay. So let me go through some terms. I want to make sure that that we're sort of all on the same page about different criteria. So when we're talking about need-blind admission, what we're talking about then is schools that admit students on the basis of academic or personal criteria, but with no regard to their financial circumstances. A lot of people think this is the best way to do admission, because then a family's ability to pay is not factored in at all to admission. The flip side of that, the other viewpoint, is that if you admit a whole lot of people that you actually can't enroll, one has to ask whether that's the right way to do things. And I keep using the terms right and best way, and the reality is with admission, this is a true art. So there isn't a black and white, yes and no, right and wrong answer. Another way to do admissions is need aware. And this, in this particular circumstance, not only are you looking at a potential student's academics and personal criteria, but you're also looking at the family's ability to pay. If you have a financial model that assumes that you need 75% of your students to be full-pay students, it makes sense that you do need-aware admission, because you need to make sure that in the group you're admitting this year, that 75% of them can pay the tuition, or else you're not going to meet your own financial criteria. We use the term selectivity. This is a percentage of applicants who are admitted. And what's fascinating about this is a number that in the world of admissions can be manipulated. So if you find a way to admit a whole lot of, encourage a whole lot of applications, but you only admit a few of them, and you manage this, then your selectivity percentage goes way up or way down, whichever way. And so, but it's a number that you need to know. When people say selectivity, that's what they're talking about, is how many of your applicants are actually admitted. And then your yield is the number of students that you offered admission who actually come to your school. So those are just some definitions that you may hear in the course of admissions conversations. When you're talking about financial aid, we use the term need a lot. And what need is, most schools use some criteria to determine whether a family qualifies for financial aid. And need is the amount of tuition less what the family can contribute. Most of the systems used for calculating financial aid take into account a family's income and their assets. They also look at, to some degree, at the family's obligations or debts, although certain debts are not calculated in, like credit card debt. When we talk about a family having full need, what that means is that they do not have enough resources to pay anything towards tuition. So that, again, those are just definitions so that when you hear that, you can, you know what we're talking about. When we talk about financial aid, there really are two kinds of financial aid. There is funded financial aid. This is when a school has an endowment with specific funds set aside for financial aid, or when the school receives gifts specifically for financial aid. In each of those circumstances, there is real money that is going towards financial aid. The vast majority of financial aid that's given by independent schools is unfunded. What this means is that you know, there is not actual cash coming in. We're giving a discount, and you know, and so there's no money actually involved. Financial aid, when I use that term, I'm talking about need-based aid, where a family submits an application, their financial circumstances are assessed, and then they are granted financial aid. Another kind of award that's given is a merit award, and this can be given for non-financial criteria, whether it's academic, athletic, a particular talent in the arts, for example, or a relationship. This might be an alumni child or something else. And there may or may not be a financial need criteria part of this. And the third kind of major financial aid, and I've got quotes around that when I say that, that we give is tuition remission. What this is it's an employee benefit. In a school that offers tuition remission, employees who qualify, and sometimes it's faculty only, sometimes it's all employees, they are given, if their student, if their child is admitted to the school, then they have to pay a smaller portion of tuition. Sometimes it's full remission, and the child comes for entirely for free. Sometimes it's partial remission, and they pay only a percentage of the tuition. So now we've got another polling question, Andrew. What I want to know is, at your school, what % of full-pay students do you have? And so there's a range here. And Andrew, because I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see the polling question, so when it's finished, can you tell me what it says?
Sure. I'll actually post it so you can see the results for a few seconds.
Okay.
And also, those of you who are listening, if you want to ask any questions at this time also, please put that down in the question area or the chat room. Either place is fine. And then we can relay those to Sarah.
And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. A couple more coming in. I'll leave it for a couple seconds.
Yeah, leave it another second or two, Andrew.
So here are the results, Sarah. I don't know if you can see them.
Not much.
Okay. We have 90 to 99%. We had 4% of people answer that.
Okay.
20% were in the 80 to 89%.
Okay.
The large majority, 64%, were in that 60 to 79%, and 12% were less than 60%.
Great. Oh, interesting. Okay, fabulous. Thank you. Okay, wait a minute. If I play with my dashboard, then my ability to move slides changes. Okay. So I want to walk through two scenarios with you. The first one, School A, has the capacity to fully enroll with full pay families. And I want to walk through the whole process here. So here's a a graph. And what you can see is on the left-hand side there is a tuition level, and the dotted line is where their tuition is. And the right-hand side is enrollment. And as I said, this particular school is able to fully enroll up to the optimum level with full pay families. But this school chooses to offer financial aid or remission, a discount, because they could fully enroll with full pay students, but they have chosen to enroll a portion of their student body who qualifies for financial aid or to give their employees remission. They actually, that yellow triangle represents true lost revenue. So if you are in this position where your school can fully enroll, but you choose for mission-related reasons to offer financial aid, you actually are giving up some potential revenue. So when we talk about net tuition revenue, let me move on to the next slide and you'll see what I'm talking about. So here is the way one might look at the situation that we just saw. So let's assume that the school, if fully enrolled, their tuition revenue would be $10 million. But because they're giving away $2 million in financial aid and remission, their net tuition revenue is $8 million. This is a true cost to this particular school. As you saw in the poll, there was no one that said that they do enroll 100% of full pay students. But in this particular situation, financial aid becomes a real number. And I say that because I want you to then move on to the next scenario. So School B is not fully enrolled with full pay students. Okay? So here we have the graph again, same graph you saw before. And you'll notice that the School B can only enroll this many full pay students. That's just what their demand is. But in order for them to get to optimum enrollment, they have reached out to a variety of families to fill the school, and they're fortunate to find them. And so again, the green section is the families who qualify for financial aid and are admitted to the school. Again, we have the discount line, so you can see the unfunded part. The families on financial aid and remission pay some tuition, so it's the part that's green, but the yellow part is unfunded. It is a discount that the school has offered. Now, for this particular school, here's the graph again, and now our focus, instead of being on financial aid, our focus is on the net tuition revenue. Because the reality is, I'm going to take you back to the graph. The reality is if we tip this discount line higher or lower, then the yellow triangle gets bigger or smaller, and our net tuition revenue changes accordingly to that. So when you look at this thing and you see that we talk about at this school giving $2 million in financial aid, that number could move depending on a particular family's ability to pay. So hold that thought and we'll keep on going. Here's an example and something that I want you to think about. So, oh wait, I just pushed the wrong one. Okay, so when we talk about net tuition revenue, this is the tuition remaining when you do it on a per student basis. It's the tuition amount that you will receive after calculating the marginal cost of educating a student who's receiving some financial aid. So here's an example. We're not fully enrolled, but we have given away the $2 million of financial aid. We have enrolled a whole lot of students, but we have not reached our optimum enrollment. And it's probably the summer and your admissions office is working hard, and a new student comes who's very desirable, meets all of our academic criteria and all of that. But For the tuition at this particular school is $20,000, but the family can only pay $10,000. Now, we know, because we've done the work to figure it out, that the marginal cost of educating this particular child is going to be $2,000. This child does not tip over any of the places where we have to hire another faculty member or open another section of any particular class. But there are marginal costs. There's food because we provide lunch, and there may be some other things that we provide. So that's where the $2,000 comes from. But when the family pays us $10,000 and we subtract the marginal cost of $2,000, the tuition revenue we get is $8,000. So if you look at this in the old traditional financial aid accounting fashion, this family is a $10,000 loss for us because it's financial aid that we were not planning on. But if you look at it from a net tuition revenue standpoint, we're actually getting $8,000 that we weren't going to get before. And it's really important to understand this whole piece within the context of your particular school situation. So if you are school A and you are enrolling another student, you really are losing $10,000 more than what you were planning on before. But you're doing this for a mission-related reason. You are making a conscious choice. If you're school B and this student gets you to optimum enrollment, not only are you meeting your enrollment target, but you've got $8,000 that you didn't have before this student crossed your threshold. And those are the two different ways of looking at this. For most schools, the school A scenario doesn't factor in because we don't have 100% of our enrollment as full pay families.
Sarah, would this be a good spot to just stop and ask if there's any questions from?
Yeah, this would be great.
And so if there are any questions from the group, you can either write it in the chat room, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, or there is a place for you to raise your hand, and we can turn on. Either way, we can turn on your mic if we know who you are. We'll turn on your mic. You can ask the question, or you can write the question. Either way. So this is a good spot to ask about anything we've covered so far. And always it takes one person to ask the first question before we get lots.
Yeah, someone needs to be brave.
We have a hand raised.
Oh, good.
All right.
You want to turn on their microphone, Andrew?
Sure.
Who is it? Who's raised their hand?
Christine Schwegel. I hope I am pronouncing your name right. I'm probably not, but I am turning your microphone on, Christine.
So go ahead, Christine.
Hey. Christine?
Well, Christine, if you're having a problem with your microphone, go ahead and just put the question into the chat room down below and we can take it from there, or put it in the question box and we can do it there. Okay, well, why don't we move forward, Sarah, if you want to continue,
okay.
And then Christine, if you can put your question in the chat room, we'll stop at some point and get to your question.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about tuition discounting and sort of the other factors to think about. Before a school gives away any financial aid or any kind of discount, it would be best practice if you actually had a philosophy statement of why you provide financial aid. And these are complicated things to do, but the whole exercise of trying to write down why you give discounts is really helpful for clarifying why this fits in with your mission, and clarifying for you, how to measure how successful you are. So I've got on the screen now the beginning of a particular school's philosophy statement. And you can see that their statement goes on for 2 more paragraphs about really what they're trying to accomplish with their financial aid program. And I use the term financial aid and discounts interchangeably, and I do that on purpose because the reality is for most of us that financial aid is a discount. We are saying that because a family has certain financial criteria, we're going to let them pay less tuition than another family which doesn't meet those financial criteria. So it really is a discount. But why are we doing it? Are we doing it to fill seats? Are we doing it because we value economic diversity and what that brings to our community as a whole? Are we doing it because we have a commitment to all kinds of diversity and economic is just one of them? And I would push you to, particularly trustees, if you don't have a philosophical statement for financial aid, to really think about why you're doing it. And even if it is only to fill seats, you need to have that conversation so that you're totally upfront with each other that this is why we're having financial aid. So tuition discounting is really this art and science of establishing a price for attendance to maximize your tuition revenue while meeting your enrollment goals. And I say it's an art and a science because it is both. The science part is asking people to fill out a financial aid application and then having that information processed by whatever service you use, whether you do it in-house or you use an external service. That all looks like a science. And they all come back and they tell you that given a family's particular circumstance, they can afford to pay, X dollars towards your tuition. The art part comes in figuring out how to really help enroll that family. And is the processing of financial aid, does it take into account all of the factors of that family? So I'll give you a circumstance. I did financial aid for Friends School of Baltimore when I was the business officer. And this was in the late 80s. And for those of you who may not remember that time, it was a time when housing values were spiking. And the inflation in the early 80s had been astronomically high, and it had come down, but what had happened was the real estate market was soaring. And so when a family filled out a financial aid application, they would put down their primary residence, and they would put down that they had bought the house for $30,000, but it was now worth $120,000. The reality is that asset for a family looked significant on their financial aid application, but it actually didn't provide them with any cash that they could use to pay tuition. So we made an internal decision that when calculating financial aid, we would not count the value of the primary residence. If the family owned 2 houses, one being a vacation home or an income property, that would be counted fully, but their primary residence would not be counted. This is the art part. We were trying to figure out how to allow the families we were looking for to enroll in our school, and so that was part of what we had to do. What's changed since 1980, 85, and today are a couple of different things. Tuitions have escalated dramatically. Back then I was worrying about what would happen to our enrollment when tuition crossed $7,500. For everybody in the room, the virtual room, $7,500 at this point, we'd love our tuitions to be at $7,500 because many more families would be able to afford to come to our school. And that's really what's changed, is back in the 80s, our financial aid program was about access, about bringing in students who would not normally have enrolled in our school. Today, that same school's financial aid program is about affordability. about how to enroll the families who had been traditionally the families we enrolled who are now struggling to pay the tuition. So in addition to finding families who are not, the traditional financial, independent school families, finding ways to enroll the families who are struggling paying tuition. So financial aid serves both goals today. The other thing that's changed is people's willingness to pay tuition. As tuition levels have gotten higher and higher, families have really started thinking about how to use their resources. One of the most dramatic impacts of the economic mess of 2008 was every family now thinks about how they use their resources in ways they did not before. And we find that in independent schools particularly clear as families are making choices. Are they going to enroll their child at kindergarten, or are they going to wait to come to our school till 6th grade or 9th grade when they use a smaller percentage of their resources? Figuring that the local public school option is okay for their child in elementary school. Oops, wrong direction. So when I say discounts, we have all kinds of fun discounts at independent schools. Some schools offer a sibling discount. So if you enroll a second or a third child in your family in the school, this school will give you a discount. What's fascinating, educate that second child or the third child than it did the first one. But this is some way of acknowledging to a family that our school, if you give a sibling discount, our school values having all the children from your family in our school. We have financial aid. We've talked about that. Some schools give a discount if you pay the full tuition all at once or early, which is great. And, back when, those of us who are older remember fondly when you could put money in a bank and it earned interest. It made a whole lot of sense for a school if you got family to pay the whole tuition up front. The school could actually make enough money by investing that tuition payment to cover the discount that they offered for early payment. Today, with bank interest rates being as low as they are, it's nice that the family pays up front, but we actually don't make a whole lot of money on that. So again, I'm questioning whether this kind of a discount makes sense. We're also seeing the emergence of merit awards. I have athletics here. I know that we're not supposed to do athletic awards, but somehow or other, offering a merit award for a student who meets the criteria that we're looking for in terms of their capacity, their academic qualifications, their ability to sing or act, whether they're an alumni child. When your school is not fully enrolled, this is a way to attract the kinds of students that you're looking for. But when you start giving merit awards that are not based on any financial criteria, you need to have very specific criteria of how you're doing that. Because as soon as you give a merit award to one family, that information will become public knowledge quickly. No matter what, these kinds of things do not stay quiet. And so another family will come to you and say, wait, family A got an award for their student to come to our school, and my student is every bit as bright, or I'm an alum, or whatever the criteria, and I want the same award. And the school needs to have a process so that you can answer family B and say, no, for these reasons you're not going to get the award, but other families met these criteria and they received the awards. And I already talked about remission and how that works for your employees. It is the value of remission is that it can offer the opportunity for the children of your employees to be enrolled at your school. It creates a tighter bond with from that employee to the school. It also brings all kinds of interesting diversity into the school. And so it is something that's a really important factor for many schools. But there's a real cost. If you think about School A in the early example, when they can fully enroll their school with full-pay students, to offer remission to the faculty and staff, and to bring in families who are not paying the tuition, they're giving up a full-pay seat for that. So again, this gets back to mission-related questions and having having a whole process about the criteria that you offer these discounts is really important.
Sarah, can we put a pause here?
Sure.
We put up on the screen for everyone just a quick poll question about how many schools offer merit awards. We wanted to see that was interesting for everyone. Also, Sarah, we have a couple questions in the question box. So the first one is coming to us from Suzanne Smith, and her question is, what about a cash? What about a cash payment by check, not credit card discount?
Right. You can offer a discount for paying by cash or check versus credit card because, as we all know, if you pay by credit card, and many families like to pay by credit card, they like getting the airline miles, but there is a cost to the school for that. And so what some schools, and you're not allowed to pass along the fee because the credit card companies have rules about that. There are some circumstances when you can pass along the fee, but generally the answer has been no to that. So what schools have done is they've turned it around and said, all right, if you will pay with cash or with a check, we'll give you a discount, essentially equivalent to the credit card fee. And so it's been another discount. So good call. I'm not sure this was an exhaustive list of discounts, but that's a great call.
Great, thank you. And then there's a comment in the question room from Carol, and she said, good point about the awards. They need to be also determined by need-based application via SSS or other tools.
Yeah. And it's really, anytime you're given a discount, it's really helpful to have clear criteria of why you're giving that discount. And it just makes such an enormous difference in helping the school say no to some people and yes to others. Where I've seen schools get into trouble is they're not fully enrolled and somebody comes in and says, you know, I'd like to enroll my child, and it's a desirable child, but the family doesn't want to pay the full amount. And someone says yes without criteria, and that opens the floodgates to all kinds of issues.
There's a quick question, Andrew, this is actually for you. Do you see it in the question room? Can you just answer that for Amy?
Sure. I was actually going to answer it and send it to everyone. Amy asked why she can't see the questions, and the reason is the questions go to us, the four panelists here, and only we can see them. If you want to comment or have a question that everyone can see, put it in the chat and make sure it goes to the entire audience. That way we can all see it. I think that's probably the better option. If you have any technical questions that you need answered, you can feel free to put it in the questions section.
That's a good idea.
And Sarah, we have the results from the poll. Of the schools represented today, 81% do not offer merit awards.
And so does that mean that 19% do?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's a real change. There was a period when that would have been 99% didn't offer merit. And what we're beginning to see, and it makes sense, as schools are clearer about who they want to enroll, merit awards become something that is important. I asked another polling question, Andrew, because I was trying to get a sense of the level of tuition of the schools on the webinar. So if you can do this one, it would be great.
It's up there now. We'll leave it up for a few seconds, a minute or so.
Great.
Sarah, if a school does not go to 12th grade, should they not answer this poll?
Oh, no, they could just pick their highest grade. Sorry, I, of course,
so
totally
highest
forgot.
grade. The highest
the
tuition
K5s, the K8s. I apologize.
Yeah, okay, yeah, whatever their highest tuition is.
Yeah. Thanks, Barbara.
Sure.
So we'll leave it for another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll close the poll.
89% have voted.
I always want to get 100. All right, we'll go ahead and close it. So Sarah, just so you can see it, 4% were in the more than 40,000 answer. 56% were 30,000 to 40,000. 24% were 20,000 to 29,999, and that left 16% in less than 20,000.
Okay. Good. Well, that's helpful. Thank you. You know, it gives me some sense that we've got people from around the state, you know, in addition to New York City. So that's good. Okay. So here's this new trend. I was working with this school where they told me this story. This family came to visit. It was a boarding school in the middle of nowhere, and the child was exactly the right kind of student for this school, and the admissions officer was having a great time taking them on a tour. Mom and Dad were totally animated about the whole thing. And they finished the tour, and Mom and the student wandered off somewhere, and Dad sits down with the admissions person and says, listen, this is a great school, and it's exactly right for my child, and this is really wonderful. But I'm not willing to pay $40,000 for this school. I'll pay $30,000. And so I've told this story in a lot of different settings, and what happens is admissions people across the country say to me, oh yeah, that's happening all the time. And this is something where it really is putting a strain on the admissions people. How do they respond? It is an indication of sort of a lot about some of the families that come to independent schools. For most everything else that they do in their life, they bargain for it. And they want to bargain with us. It's like buying a car. Nobody pays a sticker price. I want to pay less. And how we as schools deal with that is really an issue. Holding the hard line and saying no, you know. I'm sorry about the noise in the background, but I can't do anything about it, so we're just going to have to deal with it. But, you know, how we deal with this trend and how we deal with discounts in our schools is something that's really important. Remember that, you know, the amount of net tuition revenue is the cash that we have to use to pay our faculty salaries and, you know, and everything else. And so we just need to sort of figure out how to deal with this emerging trend. One other thing that I want you to think about is what's really the true cost of attendance at our school. So, you know, the vast majority of the people who answered that poll, you know, their tuitions are somewhere $30,000 to $40,000. Well, that's tuition. But what else do we ask families to pay for in the course of a year at your school? Textbooks, lunch, transportation, uniforms, the amazing social studies project that they do in 7th grade where every student brings in a diorama of, you know, whatever they're studying in 7th grade these days. You know, how much do those materials cost, and how, you know, how do our families deal with that? And how transparent are we in helping our families prepare for what it really costs to come to our school? So this list of questions is something that I would love for everybody in the audience to think about, because how we go about developing pricing for our schools is really, I think, a question in front of us. When you look at your website, if you get the website statistics, of what happens on your website, the page where people go and then leave the site not to return, is your tuition page. How do we talk about tuitions? And that's something that's really important. But then when you sit there and you say, all right, well, how do we set our price? So for some of us, you know, could we charge more and give bigger discounts to more people so that the person who wants to bargain with you gets the opportunity to do so? Are we leaving money on the table by only charging $35,000? There are families in our, in our community who have enormous wealth capacity, who could pay way more than what we're charging. But then what happens to our fundraising? The reason, we raise tuition every year. I mean, for those of trustees, and many of you are on the call are trustees, you've sat through the budget setting meeting where we sit there and we try to figure out how to keep our tuition raises as low as possible. And the way, and the reason that we struggle with that is because the flip side is our salaries, what we're paying our faculty, and adding new programming. We have great expectations from our families of the caliber of the education we offer and the programs that we are bringing into the school. So if you want to add new programs and if you want to pay the faculty more, then we have to find the revenue from somewhere. And for most of us, that somewhere is tuition. How do we strike this balance between continually escalating tuitions and maintaining some economic diversity in our, family, in the student body? And these are, I'm posing them as rhetorical questions, but these are the kinds of things that trustees need to be talking about. We need to figure out about our pricing. What are we trying to do? There have been a number of schools, mostly in the higher ed level, that have made conscious choices to lower their tuition. So Sewanee comes to mind. They did intentionally lower their tuition. If you're going to do this, you have to do this with a lot of marketing. Because one of the things that happens in the U.S. in particular is that people assume the more you charge for something, the better it is. And so they make these qualitative judgments about a product, in this case our educational product that we offer, based on how much we charge. When I was at Friends School of Baltimore, there were 8 schools that were very close together, and we compared ourselves to each other. And Friends was always number 7 in the hierarchy of tuitions. There were 6 schools that charged more than we did, and there was an implied message that they offered something better than we did. Now, mind you, the difference was only $500. And so you can't have that dramatic a qualitative difference in $500, but it felt like it. And we would every year try and figure out how to raise our tuitions enough so we could get to spot number 4, because that's where we wanted to be, is right in the middle. We didn't want to be at the bottom. We didn't want to be at the top. We wanted to be in the middle. And every year we would decide what our tuition increase was, and the other schools would make their determinations, and we were always in spot number 7. So if you lower tuitions, will people in your community say, whoa, what's going on with that school? They must not be doing as good a job as they used to because their tuitions are so much lower than their nearest competitor. How do we counteract that? How do we manage our tuition levels? And so these are the kinds of, sort of questions that keep going through my mind in particular. And as I work with different schools, I find that everybody's struggling with how we offer discounts, how we price ourselves, and then getting back to the title of this webinar, the net tuition revenue. What really are, how much money do we actually have to operate? And so what I'd love to do now, Mark, is to really open it up to questions, that cover the gamut of everything. I mean, I've raised a whole lot of issues. And it would be great if, we had an opportunity to sort of let people ask whatever questions they want.
So we do have one question sitting in the question room right now.
Okay.
And that was from Christine Schwegel, who wanted to ask earlier, and she had a technical problem.
Yeah.
She wanted to ask, at what point in the admissions process do you consider marginal tuition income as a benefit, even if the financial discount pushes the target financial assistance percentage over budget?
Well, that's a great question. So what I'm seeing that's happening now is that more and more admissions offices are, they have specific deadlines for applications and financial aid applications, and then there is the notice deadline that they will tell everybody who has received acceptance. And I think, it hovers around March, April, depending on what kind of a school you are and where you're located. From that point on, they begin what is more like rolling admissions, in that if the school is not full at that point, then they will work one family at a time. Where I see the marginal revenue coming into consideration is sort of from the deadline forward until the school becomes full. Because what you're hoping is that you can fill the school within the confines of your financial aid budget, which is why you set that budget. You basically figured out what is the level of tuition that we need to operate on. And so you get to the admission notification date, and what you're hoping is that enough of the students that you've offered admission that will accept your offer of admission so the school will be full. But what we're seeing in many, many schools is that while the school is close to being full, it's not really full. We've noticed a softness, particularly, sort of in the mid-Atlantic, in the Southeast, in the Ohio region. Those have been going on for a while. We're noticing it after 2008 in a lot of different communities where we hadn't seen it before. What was fascinating to me in this year's admission cycle in New York City, schools were beginning to talk about softness in enrollment even in New York. And it may be that the definition of softness in New York City is slightly different than Buffalo or Rochester or Syracuse. But nonetheless, what you're seeing is families are becoming tentative about enrolling in independent schools because the cost is significant. When you think about enrolling a kindergarten child and having that child in independent schools for 13 years through grade 12, that adds up to pretty significant dollars. And for some families, they have the capacity to pay that without thinking about it. But for most of the families, they're thinking long and hard about it. This is a significant investment. They care deeply about their child, but they're thinking about it hard. So going back to the question, I really see it playing out in sort of the April to September timeframe. One of the things that's problematic is you have a school that's not fully enrolled. They have spent, I've got quotes around that, spent their financial aid. And a great applicant family comes in the summer, and that child could totally benefit from the education that school has to offer. And what happens is that the school says no because the financial aid has been spent, and yet the family could pay half the tuition. And that's where you really get into the question that I would love boards to think about, is to not be so hung up on the absolute financial aid number, but to be watching the net tuition revenue number.
Interestingly enough, you made a comment about softer enrollments, and I think what you're saying is correct, even here in New York City and throughout the state. In our recent NYSAIS regional meetings in the Western Lakes area, in Buffalo particularly, they're actually seeing their enrollments have stabilized and are stronger this year, which is very nice to hear for the Buffalo schools. Let me move to, there's two more questions. There's two questions in the question room right now. So the first one comes from Peter McAndrew, and Peter asks, in your experience, are most schools establishing financial aid budgets by determining a percentage that is then applied to tuition revenue, or are schools moving to having a set dollar amount that is then increased each year absent a relationship to increase in the tuition itself?
It's a great question. I don't think most is the right term for either of those. I think you see schools doing both of those or either of those. So there are some schools that have created financial metrics, and in that particular situation, one of their metrics would be that financial aid is always going to be X% of tuition revenue. So once they set a budget for tuition revenue, their financial aid budget is set. Then there are other schools where it is a relative thing. So this year, our financial aid is, I'll make up a number, $1 million. And we're going to raise tuition for next year 4.5%. So we need to raise our financial aid at least 4.5% to be able to assist the families who are already enrolled here. And you see both of those things happening. It is really the culture of the school. There are times where you will also see in the budgeting process where a school will say, listen, 4.5% raising our financial aid budget to match the tuition increase is great. But in this particular year, the class that's graduating only has a small amount of financial aid, and the admissions office is not going to have enough money to enroll the students they need to enroll for next year unless we put some extra money in financial aid. So it is probably the most common approach to setting financial aid is that relativity. Where are we in relation to our tuition increase, and where are we in relation to the number of families, and there are those moments. What happens with financial aid is careful as you try to be, one class will have more financial aid in it than is normal, and when that, we sort of talk about that as the pig and the python. As it goes through each successive year, you keep waiting for the year they graduate, because the year they graduate there's much more financial aid available, and it takes some of the pressure off the budget. But my experience is that budgeting for financial aid is not a prescriptive, a certain percent of tuition and that's it, not discussion. It is discussed at every budget meeting I've ever sat in.
Sarah, thank you. We have another question in the question room, and this is about your opinion about tuition remission, and do you think that there's any advantages in terms of retention of key faculty members? And that comes to us from Carol. Carol.
Yeah, I think it is. It's really a great retention tool. When I started working in independent schools, there weren't a lot of schools doing remission, and there was a long conversation about how the limited resources we had for financial aid needed to go to families who really needed our help, as opposed to families who might have other resources. And remission, it doesn't look at that. Remission is just, if you work here and you qualify for remission, then you get it. What's happened since I first began, I feel like I'm Methuselah here, I've been around forever, but what's happened since then is that the baby boomers, we are eventually going to retire, and the number of excellent faculty, young faculty coming into the profession, there's this sense that we need to work really hard at retaining the best faculty members we can. Remission is an enormously effective tool in retention of faculty. For a faculty member receiving remission, it's like getting a 30 to 40% salary increase immediately, not taxable. When that faculty member says, okay, I've been at your school, School A, I've been here for 5 years, it's been great, but I'm ready to do something else. If they have a child enrolled in that school, they think long and hard before they think about going to School B. If School B also has remission, then the dollars are probably okay, but moving a child, I mean, for any of you who have children and have had kids in school, you know that moving a child from one school to another is not a casual decision to be made. And so the combination of moving the child and losing remission keeps a lot of people in their current school. Now, the flip side is that if the teacher is not great, you know, it's hard to encourage them to leave when they're going to take a 30 to 40% pay cut by leaving, and their child is going to, you know, they'll either have to pay you the cash or the child will have to leave. You know, and that's one of the things that gets into a whole other thing. Maybe we'll have another webinar about, you know, employees and how to do great employee evaluation so that the teachers who need to be encouraged to leave are indeed encouraged to do so. But
that would be great, actually.
Yeah,
that would
be a really nice webinar. Sarah, you know, we're approaching the end of the hour. Yes. I want to thank you for spending this time with us today, and to the attendees, I want to thank all the attendees for being with us. We will, Barbara, can we send out a poll or survey to our attendees just to get the sense for how this first webinar went?
Yes, we can.
We would very much love your feedback on how we can make this better for you, what works for you in this format. We know this is a new format for us, so it's an evolving format. I do want to encourage you to attend our next webinar on Monday, January 13th, 2014, in the new year at 4:30 p.m. We will be sending out reminders to everyone. Sarah, thank you very much for doing this for us. We really appreciate it. Andrew, thank you for the technical support. And Barbara,
thank you everyone.
Chat room. Somebody asked in the questions, will we have access to the presentation PowerPoint? We will be putting all the PowerPoints into the NYSAIS community space, and that is community.nysais.org. So if you just type into your browser community.nysais.org, it'll take you to the community space where we have lots of different groups. You'll be able to join the group that's associated with this webinar series. So, Christine, that should take care of your question. And thank you all very much for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you on January 13th, 2014. And please remember to fill out the survey that Barbara sends to you so that we can help in our next set of programming with our webinars. Thank you all very much.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.